The European Union and China held their 22nd bilateral summit via video conference on Monday. The summit is the first to feature the new President of the European Council, Charles Michel, and President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. The new EU leaders spoke to Chinese President Xi Jinping and Chinese Premier Li Keqiang. The summit also came amid tensions between China and the United States. Will the summit propel China-EU cooperation? Joining me for the discussion from Brussels is Pieter Cleppe, head of the Brussels office of Open Europe, a think tank, and in Beijing via Skype, Jin Ling, senior research fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome to both of you. I want to go to Ms. Jing first. Now, President Xi has highlighted how China and the EU share a lot of common ground. He said that China wants peace instead of hegemony. There is no conflict of fundamental interests between China and Europe. Cooperation far outweighs competition, and consensus far outweighs disagreement. Ms. Jin, based on what evidence does the Chinese president make such observation? And if this is true, or according to China, what are the areas of common interest that China and the EU can work together on?
Yes, I think the observation is coming from the China-EU cooperation history. If we look back the history of the cooperation between China and Europe, both of them have ever served as the major power to fight against the hegemony in the Cold War. And today, both of the powers advocate for cooperation and for the peace coordination and advocate for multilateralism. All of them are important for today's uncertain world. And also, if you look at the China and the Europe economic cooperation, we can see the very close interlinks between the two sides. That's a benefit for the two sides. Chinese huge market has ever provided huge wealth and benefits for EU companies. According to the research by the EU Parliament think tank, the European companies have benefited a lot from Chinese market. The profit is much, much higher compared with the other markets. And of course, in the past, China also benefit for the economic cooperations in the technology upgrade, etc., etc. So that is coming from the history, from the reality. And of course, if looking into the future, these two powers, two markets and two civilizations are also very important for the stability and prosperous world.
Yeah, let me go to our friend from Europe. Peter, are such views shared by our European counterparts that from the history and also from the future prospects of bilateral cooperation, there are more commonalities between China and Europe than differences?
Well, I do think that there's a consensus in Europe that trade between continents, and in particular trade between Europe and China, has been a great thing for both. That said, I think in the last 6 months there's been a bit of a change in Europe. I think the EU and European politicians in general have become more, let's say, critical towards China. Not so much only because of the, let's say, the well-known issues, the fact that the EU wants China to be less protectionist, that it wants China to be more and better protecting intellectual property rights, but also it is more aware now that certain issues are so important that and certain products are so important that they should be produced in Europe. This is the lesson drawn from the COVID crisis, and that definitely has an impact on China-EU relations. Now, I think at the end of the day, if you combine Huawei, all these issues, even Hong Kong, if you throw it all in one, I think there's still a great understanding that at the end of the day we have to find a settlement here. We have to find a solution, and I think most people think a solution is possible. but we are not there yet.
Of course, but both sides are interacting with each other, engaging with each other, and trying to, you know, come to solutions and come to agreements. For instance, an official statement from China on Monday talked about the pledge or the hope that both sides can sign a bilateral investment treaty by the end of this year, and I understand that hope is also shared by the European side. So, Ms. Jin, how significant would that be, and what's the likelihood?
Yeah, I think if you're looking back last year on the very difficult situation, both sides advocated for the commitment that the deal could be reached by the end of this year. So there is a strong political will from the two sides to promote the deal coming to being. And of course, today we could hear some difficulties in the negotiations. But anyway, this time both sides advocate for the deal again. So we could see the commitment are there and the political will are even higher. I think that's very important in today's, in today's world, when the world, both China and Europe are facing the challenges after the COVID-19. So from my perspective, I'm personally optimistic about the deal reached, and of course that needs the compromises from two sides. So personally, today when I look at the reports or the comments from the European sides, it seems that all the ends will depend on the Chinese side. That will, what's wrong. So.
Peter, what is the sentiment there? Because if you read some of the media reports, you don't really know whether things are looking good or bad. People will be saying that the talks are at a standstill, although people are pledging they want to have it signed before the end of the year. So, are we looking at a bigger possibility, or are we looking at a standstill, Peter? How do you look at the sentiments that's being expressed here?
Well, if you look at the press conference yesterday, the EU High Representative, the Foreign Minister, was sort of much softer than the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. So I think it's fair to say that Europeans are still making their mind up. Also the British, same thing. They're wondering, okay, like it makes no sense whatsoever to cut off all trade with China. That's obviously not what we want, but we have some genuine concerns that we want to see met. We don't want Huawei and allowing it to build 5G and important infrastructure to endanger our security or stability of our systems. I mean, even with Hong Kong, the EU is trying to make clear to China, is communicating the message that, look, at the end of the day, Hong Kong is where the West and the East meet. If you make Hong Kong entirely Chinese, then you sort of lose the benefit of that bridge that you have to Western capital, Western investment, Western trade. So that's sort of the arguments that the EU is making. But I mean, how to do that in practice? There's a lot of, let's say, soul-seeking, a lot of trial and error, and I think that's going to remain for a while. So I think what China can do is try to help the EU, basically. Tell the EU, look, I mean, we understand that this is IT infrastructure, for example. We don't want this to be a concern for you. So here's a technical solution where you can be entirely sure that there's no security dangers whatsoever. I mean, that would be helpful if that would be possible, of course.
Yeah.
But I think we'll have to. The devil will be in the detail to sort it all out.
Yeah. Ms. Jing, what is China's strategy here vis-a-vis Europe against the backdrop of a very rapidly deteriorating relationship with the United States, and things are not looking any better in the near future? What does China want to achieve with this relationship with Europe? I mean, we've seen Chinese president, for instance, making phone calls to European leaders very frequently since the beginning of this year. 4 times with Merkel, 5 times with Macron since the beginning of this year. What is on the mind of China, Ms. Jin?
Yes, I like to say it's a common reading that today China wants to have closer relations with Europe. It's because of the deteriorating relations between China and the U.S. But as a scholar, following the China-EU relations till today for more than 10 years, I like to say China's European strategy has never changed. That is the so-called three supports. We support the European integration, we support the Europe growth, prosperity and stability, and also we support the European integration. Today, why there is that kind of common reading is because I think the importance between China and Europe cooperation have been higher compared with the past because of the uncertain world rising from the unilateralism, because of the common challenges we are facing. So today, if there is a kind of saying, the closer relations between China and Europe is because of the common interests, common, strategic needs from the two sides. It's not a kind of, to unite with Europe against the U.S. That is not a kind of right logic to see the China-Europe relations.
Yeah. In a business survey run by the European Chamber of Commerce in China, China remains, a most recent one, China remains among the top 3 investment destinations for European businesses for 63% of respondents. Denis Tapor, Global Managing Director of Roland Berger, a consultancy, said European companies are increasingly in China for China, both to meet growing domestic demand and to tap into its innovative system. And Charlotte Hull, Vice President of the EU Chamber, said China's new infrastructure plan could open a new window to electronic mobility and renewable energy. So, Peter, what does the survey say about European companies' outlook in China, and how much of China-EU ties are driven by business interest in the EU to access China's market?
Well, I think China policy in the EU is definitely driven by business interest, which is not a bad thing. So especially Germany, Angela Merkel is always listening carefully to what European businesses say. And indeed the opportunities are fantastic. I mean, China has made enormous progress in the last few decades, and there's still fantastic opportunities ahead for both Chinese people and for Europeans. Now the question is how do let's say newer concerns about disinformation, the EU accusing China of disinformation, the EU accusing China of mingling in the Balkan, all these relatively new issues, how does that endanger the business agenda? I think to a certain degree. So the whole policy should now be oriented at reassuring. If China investing in the Balkan, that's fine. If a Chinese company wants to invest in the Balkan, I don't think European politicians will have a major problem with that. They have a problem when they suspect it is a political investment, that it's oriented at gaining leverage. So I think the way out will be to sort of reassure Europeans that, look, I mean, we're only here to do business. We are not here with some imperial logic, so to speak. So I think that's sort of the nut that will need to be cracked.
All right. We're going to leave it there. Many thanks to Pieter Cleppe and Jin Ling joining us from Europe and China. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. Thanks for watching. We've got The Point.